This is going to be our Sirius747 build guide. We have all the hardware and parts here, and I got some tools ready to go. This is going to be interesting because not only is it one of the first ones we've ever built, but I've also got some prototype motors from a custom manufacturer who's able to get double the RPMs and higher torque than the default. So this is going to be a new test of this specific motor. The normal ones work just fine, available in like the 700 RPM or 300 RPM range, but the torque makes it so if you get a bad dart, you might get a jam, or the pusher might not keep up on a overstacked mag or a double sprung mag. And 762, that's about 10 darts per second. This one is double the RPM and higher torque, so it's going to be about 1400 RPM, which is going to be great. This is going to be great. If I'm going full auto, I might as well go full auto. I'm also thinking about doing a semi-auto only version or something like that for those who want a semi-auto version. However, since we're doing full auto, might as well go full auto. It had a similar build, kind of like the motor flywheel combo as, say, a Lepus with the same crush, which is a pretty wide crush. Default is 32.5, but we'll come out with different cages for you to get different performance as you'd like. I'm also going to try, obviously, in this build, I'm going to troubleshoot either on camera or off camera different wheel and flywheel setups in the same cage, and of course make a different crush as well to try to get the higher performance. And with the right motors and wheels, you could potentially get up to 180 to 200 feet per second. This one's going to be more like 140 and maybe up to 160 if I'm lucky, but the default setup gets you about 100 or 110 to 130 FPS like a Lepus. So this is basically, I think, a sci-fi version of a Lepus because the function is very similar. It uses straight Talon mags. Again, it's just Hurricane wheels, Fang motors to get you that setup. But with 74K motors, either Merlin's on 3S or Van Blaster 74K motors, you could get up to 140, which is what we did in the last build. This build will probably have to settle for something similar, but I'm hoping with a few modifications, if not to just filing or drilling out some parts, then to one or two prints. Hopefully we can get it much higher FPS without having to change very much for you guys. But overall, here's the build guide. I will reference his original step-by-step build guide. There were a couple of things different from his version of the build guide and the most recent version of the prints. I'm saying that from his most recent version, not just our version, but we have done a few tweaks as well to make things fit nicer just for our tolerances, as far as some hole fits that came out maybe a little too tight, especially on the pins. Almost all the holes in his build guide recommend drilling to 3mm, but I don't know about you, I don't personally have a 3mm drill bit. I probably should, but resizing those holes makes it just a lot easier to build with that file set. So without further ado, we're going to jump into it. The tools you need, of course, is soldering iron and solder, and other electronics tools like wire strippers you may need. For the electrical components and the heat inserts, that soldering iron tip can come in handy as well. And then I like to have a handful of drill bits and drivers on hand. I've got a 2mm for all of the screws for the bulk of it, and then a Phillips is all you need. And the only reason why I need a 2mm is because I have these flat heads, which are M3 flatheads, so I've got a 2mm drive on those. If you're using the flathead hex driven, you could also get Phillips as well. It'll work just fine. And then all of the other screws, he designed it to use these self-tapping or self-threading screws, self-tap screws, which are Phillips, which is fine. It works, although the plastic, or I should say the metal, is fairly, soft, so you could end up stripping it. So you want to make sure you use a nice small Phillips driver to make sure it fits. But if you want to use something else, you could of course get different screws for that as well. And then this is all the hardware that will come in our hardware kits, with the exception of maybe this switch. I find that you don't actually need the curved arm. You can use a regular arm and just bend it, and that works totally fine. I'm going to use this curved arm because I have a whole bunch extra in the shop. But I will build one with the straight arm and show you how to do that as well. We will just jump into it. I am going to reference his build guide as well to make sure I'm at least following on what you guys would normally be able to see as well, as far as if you didn't have access to our build guide because perhaps it crashes or you can't access it or whatever have you. I also have the wire lengths already listed out on that guide as well. So he didn't have any wire lengths, he just had a wiring diagram, but then he had you build it and then said, okay, put the wiring in later. He didn't do the wiring as he went. So I went back through, added lengths to all of the wires and when to solder them, so that should save you some headache as far as order of operations goes. So there they are. You can pre-cut them. I like to pre-cut them as before I start building, and I'm going to do that now so that way I can make sure that the guide is correct in all of its references, and if not, then we'll of course publish this video later with those edits. So I'm going to just do that now, and of course my normal soldering supplies would just be some wire strippers and stuff like that. So I'm going to cut these wires and then jump into it. Of course, with a lot of moving parts, you want to make sure they are fairly sanded so they'll slide. The pusher slides in this block here, and I want to make sure that fits. And they were printed on completely different printers as well. So yeah, that'll work. It's a little tight on the end, but we're not going back that far anyway. That'll work. You can even use lube if it's not tight enough or smooth enough for you, which I might do. His originally designed return spring is pretty weak, so I would recommend beefing that up or filing your prints more. We will send you a beefier spring than the default, of course. That should be okay. Going to make sure that the pusher slides in the frame. Prints came out okay quality. Yep, it slides, and then this will slide in the top. No supports, we're clean, ready to go. Then I'm going to take my long spring, which is my 50 millimeter, slide that into the pusher body, then slide my pusher onto that. Then I'm going to take my pusher motor, whichever RPM you're using, and put it in the back like that. Then I'm going to take my pusher motor housing and slide it on top. That'll hold the pusher in. And that'll also line up to the holes in the back here. And then we'll install this. This is just 2x8s, which are the second smallest screw. So not the 2x5s or the 2x10s, two 2x8s. Then this one, the main one, gets a 2x12, which is going to be the longest of the narrow screws. Nice and tight. Feels good. With the flat side of the motor, where I can reach it, if you need to, you can run some power to the motor and spin it so you can access the flat side of the motor shaft facing up. I'm going to install my gear with the flat side. The small nub faces down. The flat side faces the screw port. Then I'm going to do an M3 set screw with a 1.5 millimeter hex key. I'm going to tighten that till I feel it kind of bite down on the motor shaft, and you can usually feel it as well, or you can see it a little bit in the hole. If I clean out some of that print, you can see it in the hole. See a little bit of a stress mark, but that's usually okay. Just gonna tighten it until I can kind of feel it hit against that shaft. I'm going to install the pusher rack. This gets two 2.6 by 8s. So again, these are going to be your thicker 8 millimeter length screws. Line up those holes. There we go. So you don't want to install it on too far, because then this thing, it's got to slide behind it, and if it comes out just a little bit, it's going to hit and not be able to slide. So I'm going to loosen the gear a little bit and then slide the gear up a hair. So I want that gear not to be sitting as far. Pull it out a little bit. Not that far. Just so we have a small gap behind it. That way if there's some slop in this, it still slides. So now it goes all the way forwards. There we go. Okay, I was having problems just because I think it was rubbing here, it was too far forward. So it's set now, ready to go. So another 8. So then the pusher cover gets installed with 2x8s in the top. You don't want to use a screw that's too long because then it'll interfere with the pusher beneath it. And 2x10s on the bottom. Then we'll install our top switch. Now this top switch is going to sit here with more 2 M2x12s. I like to do my top switch. I will adjust the lever after I get it all wired up and firing. I'm going to adjust the lever so that it is pressed when it is extended and then released when it is down. And that should work even if you have you know, the shorter lever like I have here, because this new pusher, he designed it such that the stop is further back, so you should have enough cycle control. Then you can bend and adjust the lever as you need to. But there's the box, and then you would just solder it onto the and then go from there, which is the 16-inch wire here, 16-inch black, 17-inch red, and then a 2-inch red going from here to the negative terminal here. Okay, so 2-inch wire goes from the C to the negative pusher. Both of these wires, these are going to go to the rest of the build. So this one's going to go to the trigger C, and then the one going to the middle of the cycle control switch is going to go to the motors, and then to the flywheel trigger, and then to the main trigger. And then the gearbox itself is going to have a battery connection going to it, and that's it. I'm gonna do the flywheel cage section. I'm gonna do my heat inserts first. I'm gonna need 6 of them. And I'm going to take one of them, put it inside here into the big hole. Next step is we're going to shove these motors in here. Now this is definitely shove them in here because you've got these little motor well things, and they go like this. I believe they're supposed to lock in, because these motors are going to bottom out. So I do this motor with the red facing forwards. This is super tight fit. And the other one, do the positive facing back. And this is supposed to fit on there. I'm going to press these in real quick over on the harbor press. Press them in so they're all the way in. Then we're going to take these little motor things. See, they need to go down another 1/8 inch or so. So these are supposed to be pressed on top, kind of like in those grooves. I don't think that's really physically that possible, but I'm gonna go back to the press and give it a try. So then we got that in there. Not super flat, but they could be flatter if we could. But I think I'm gonna try tightening them down with the 2x8s again. Very magnetic motors. I recommend printing these at very fine print quality. Don't torque these down too much. You will shear off their heads. Also, you're supposed to install these to keep the motors in, which you can do now, I suppose. But you definitely need these. If they're pretty dang tight like mine were, you could probably get away without it. But these are just designed to tighten down into the motor such that the set screw is what holds the motor into the cage. Now these ones are interesting because we're not sure how high up they need to be yet. So I'm just gonna put it out as far as I can to make sure they still spin and then get them centered with each other. Yeah, so I shouldn't hear them rubbing. And they look pretty dang centered. This one's low by a teeny tiny bit. Then the pusher guide is 2.8 by 12s. So there's these long skinny guys. So you got this cover here where the pusher goes in and out of. Goes this way, so the dart hole is facing forwards. Don't over tighten these as to not mar the print. Okay, and then we'll skip the mag release for now because that's easiest to install in the blaster later. So we're not going to install this, or the other one, we're going to install this one now. So we're going to install this one now. It's a different shape one than the original one for this particular blaster. And our mag release spring is wider such that it retains the mags better than the default spring. And then I'm going to make sure that my screw fits all the way through. It'll pivot still. Then I'm going to line up the spring and the catch to the hole above it. Now this part is the biggest pain in the butt, so hopefully you've got the patience for it. Because you got to get it all the way in there before you can even seat it. As you can see, you got the little nub on the back, so you almost have to go in backwards like that. There you go. And then I'll line up that spring to that hole just to keep it a little more centered. And then I'll drive, make sure it's lined up. Oh, and you need a heat insert on this guy too. So one heat insert here. Go. Put the back in there, put that spring up in there, then put the spring in the hole, line up the screw port again without it completely getting lost on me. There it is right there. Then reinstall the screw. Just what sticks out a little bit on the other side. Got a nice strong mag detent. That's what we like. We don't like our mags to come out when we don't want them to. There we go. Then we're going to put our core in here, but we are going to do so with tucking the wires in as we need them. So the core gets installed by 2.6 by 12s again, which are going to be our medium size, longer guys. 2 on either side with our Phillips. So with this wire, making sure that it is tucked nice and tight in there so that way it doesn't pop out on me. It still might, but I want to go to the front of the flywheel here. That's why I don't do these late at night anymore. but this one I did late at night. So connect that to there, boop. And then while the other side to go here and then out to the front like that. So we're going to strip like that. Okay, so now we have our NC going to our motors. That's correct. Our main power is just loose. Okay, so we're all good there. And then this next wire, the black one, going to my motor connector. Now that I got that one seated, I can kind of just use my black one as my red one as a guide on how long I want the black one to be. Right? So then I will take my black one, and the second joint of the black one is going to go to the pusher motor actually. So my first joint is here, my second joint is going to be here. My first joint is on the XC60, my second joint is going to be on the pusher motor, the positive of the pusher motor. Look, see if it stands up. Tin the wire connection and then connect it to my pusher. There you go. Oh, nope. Took it off too soon. There, so we can see that that is now connected, and you can see that when my wires are tucked, my red and black are about the same length. You can see that I had more slack though, so I could have made the black one a little longer. So we want those the same length. And then the first, second, third joint is going to be my motor. So now I can just pull that kind of tight, keep it tucked on this corner here, and then I can kind of mark my position and solder now my negative motor connections. And I'm going to go underneath this red wire because my red wire has kind of got more slack than a black wire. So I do black on top, or black on the bottom, red on top. And then I'm going to do our next negative just around the mag well and then there-ish. So I'm going to just strip that, twist. Do a cleaner job than me, a little rushing it. I'm hungry, it's dinner time, haven't had lunch yet. Yep, that will work. I'm gonna make it a little bit cleaner though. Well, there you go. So now we've got those connections done, and you can see that I want the wires to be underneath this slope here. That's how it goes back into the stock. Same thing with these ones here is when I do these ones, I want these ones to be tucked here. Kind of annoying to have to tuck them. So I guess you could actually go underneath and across to keep them tucked better, but that'll work either way. And then that should be it, because the third connection on the black one is first, second, third. The fourth connection on the black one is going to be the trigger, and then it ends there. And then you have to keep your wires separate to know which goes where. And I can show you my trick for that. I'll just kind of pull the wire to see where the slack is. And then I want to make sure that I'm done with the motors. That looks good. So then I install it into the rest of the build, which is kind of like the receiver portion. So we're going to assemble that together. Got our heat insert in there and our spring, then our receiver and kind of our couple piece here. And this just goes with 2.6 by 8, so 4 2.6 by 8s. Got some weird where the supports came out. But 2.6 by 8s. That's going to be the smallest of these guys. So we got 4 2.6 by 8s. I'm going to install those. I'd recommend printing in the orientation that we recommend you, and not the orientation that these were printed in. But it will work either way. This, of course, is just my personal one. So yours will be higher quality, of course. So then here's the fourth one, and I just did that all off camera, but hopefully that's still useful. Okay. Then with that in place, we can then install this whole thing with all the wires going through the middle. So all these loose wires are going to tuck down in the middle section to join the handle in the front. Hopefully I'm still recording audio for you guys. I'll talk louder, maybe that'll help. And then tuck and pull and slide and twist. So we have the wires tucked here. These wires we want tucked around that corner there. So I need to pull some more slack so I can get the wires up in that crevice there and then underneath that crevice there. And then I can push the motor well down. Make sure I'm not pinching any wires in the front as well. There, so you should have 4 wires up the front. Yeah, that's nice and tight there. Everything is installed properly there. So we got to get our stock latch springs in next is what we're going to do. So I'm going to make sure that my pins fit in those spots, M325s. You can see that they fit just about right in the tan, but in the orange they're way too tight, so use the most updated files. But I'll take my 1/8 inch drill bit. I'm just going to widen that out. Then we can see the pin now fits clean through, so we can be able to pivot. We'll take our smallest little springs here, and I know these prints are kind of gross. They were extremely rush printed for this video, but we'll put a little spring in there. If you need to, you can use a drop of glue to hold that in. Drop of super glue. But we'll put that spring in the stock latch. Come on. There you go. And then we'll put that stock latch with the hole on the stock body. I need to heat gun these prints for sure, but I can try this way. So spring on body, and then the other hole on latch. Put the two together. Perfect. Oh, the latches, there is a left and a right, so this one is the correct one. They're actually angled slightly. I'll show you that in a second. There we go. Get that in all the way. Solid. But the latches have a little bit of an angle on either side. Oh, I didn't drill this one out. Wow. There we go. Stock latches, if they are a bit tight and they don't actually function, you'll have to file them to make sure that they open and close. Pretty standard stuff there. Then I'll do our butt plate with 3x12s. These are the biggest guys, biggest, thickest guys. So 2 of those for the butt plate, 1 on top and bottom. You can actually do this later as well, so you can actually test the blaster and the lipo and have access before you put the butt plate on. I'm just gonna do it now though. Go back to the Phillips. Okay, that should be it for the stock. And then you have the cheek rest also. There it is. And this kind of lines up to the grooves or the little cutouts. Mostly cosmetic. Slap that into place, and if that's loose for some reason on you, then you can use 2x5 screws. These are the absolute teeny tiny smallest screws, as he recommends. Here we go, last 2. Cut these nice and loose. Then we're just gonna do our rail, our sight thing. You can kind of decide what you want to use. You can use your iron sights here that are built in to this little piece here, or actually mount this on top as well for more rail access. Take your pick. I'm probably just gonna do the whole thing. But anyway, this uses 6 heat inserts. So heat up your iron, install those guys. Nice and flat. to go. Then I'm gonna kind of push into that melted plastic back. Again, if you use different heat inserts or different files, maybe you'll have more or less plastic gush out of the hole. I personally prefer using larger holes such that I have less plastic come melt out of the hole. And I'm just gonna push that extra plastic down, but I'd recommend you using the most updated files, or we can actually widen those to 3/16, I believe, such that you have just enough plastic to hold the insert in, but not so much plastic that it's gonna gush out when you do this. You push it in and take it out. Push that extra gunky plastic back in. One more here. Push that in. Oop, that one definitely wasn't in all the way. There we go. Push, push, push. And then these last two in the top. Try to get these as straight as you can. It'll help get the screws in later. Okay, and then when that's done, I do believe it is intended to have this guy installed on the top with the larger portion here facing the larger portion here as well. And that's gonna be two M3x10s. These are flat heads, so they're gonna have a 2mm drive. And so that makes the rail kind of easy to take in and out with the heat inserts. And then that is going to go on the main body. So now we're going to install the dust cover with 2.6x8 springs. So got your 2/2 of dust cover. So you got your 2.5x8. So these are going to be 2.6x8. So these are going to be these little ones here. They're not the smallest ones and they're not the thickest ones, but they're the size in between. So 3 of those. And go back to our fill-ups. Do one on either side and then the top. So try to do it in frame, and I'm fumbling like crazy. Doing a nice low torque setting for these because they don't have to be very tight. There's one of them. Okay. Then we'll install our little sight thingy and the rest of the barrel and stuff. So we've got the dust cover release. That's gonna go in the back with the hooky parts facing the curved side. And I also have 2 more springs, little springs on either side. I'm gonna put these in first and then take these springs, and with the springs, using gravity as my friend, hold the springs upright to slide this release in, and then get those springs into the corresponding cutouts in the holes on the TAM frame. So that one's in, and then I'll set that one in. Boom. 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 There you go. There we go. Then the last 2 parts is I do like to use super glue for this barrel because it's kind of just friction fit, but it's a really loose fit I found. So I do like to use super glue on the barrel. So I'm going to slide this in here. Nice and print on print sound. You can see how loose that is. So there's a little notch where it lines up so you get the orientation right, but you can see that's going to kind of just fall out on you. So I like to super glue that in. So I put glue around this nub here, and then kind of like in the receiving nub on this end here. So I glued that in. While that's drying, I'm gonna assemble the BCAR, the integrated BCAR. He's got one that uses 8 and another one that uses 16 bearings, I believe, depending on the FPS, but I just like to put the bearings in, so with the dart goes in this side, the bearings are going to be to the right. That's the correct way to install it. And then, so holding it like this, with the flange facing me, I'm going to take one of these M3x8, I believe, set screws, and start that going. So by holding it in the body, I'm going to then twist it. A real pain in the butt. Turn. So long. But they do work very well. Worth it. So I'm just going to tighten it until I feel it tighten down, and then I'm going to stop. I don't need to tighten it too far. End up stripping it or stripping the print right there. And so you can also do it where you tighten the set screw down such that it's not quite protruding into the slot yet. So it's not quite protruding to the slot, but I can see it coming out a little bit, and then I will take my bearing, match it with the other bearing, and then I can adjust the final position of the set screw. I'm just using my finger as a guide to hold the bearing in. You could use a dart as well. I like to use this because then I can move my finger to adjust it. If I put a dart in there, I have less control, but it works too. Use something to support the back of the bearing. Tighten that down until it tightens down. Rinse and repair it. That was nice and loose. Bearing, again, I want to copy that flange pattern where the flanges are facing down. Get that bearing into his slot and then tighten it down the rest of the way. Almost kind of done here. Okay, so now I'm going to test this fit in the barrel. Should have done this earlier, but sometimes it's going to be really tight, and I want to be able to at least be able to remove it if I want to. So with this flat side facing this flat side, I'm going to push it down. That's not too bad. I just broke the glue that was drying, so I didn't use enough glue, and this bearing is probably too tight. So I'm just going to file the outside of the bearing real quick. So I'm going to be careful with it, but I'm just going to file all the bumps and grooves and creases that the printer ended up on it. All of the artifacts. Oh. Yep. Nope. Well, I will get it out eventually, if I ever need to. There we go. Then we will install the rail with these mounts. Now there is a taller and a shorter mount, so just keep in mind that the taller one goes towards the flywheel covers as the back one. So taller and shorter, tall, short, short. The base of them gets a 3x12, which is again going to be the largest. Again, the hole size might not be optimal, but get that in there. If they're kind of tight getting in, you may need to kind of clean up the holes a little bit, or the slots. Not too bad. Then the shorter ones also get some more 12s. Okay, and then we're gonna do more M3x10s to install this. So again, we've got these 4 guys here. Go back to our 2mm driver. And we said that the larger side is the front. I'm just gonna kind of squeeze that between the 2 brackets. In the back. Line that up, looks good. Install these guys. Okay, and then we will then do our grip. Let this guy dry some more. So we've got our kind of a multiple sections here. Gonna do our grip. You can see that if it came out kind of gross, depending on your support settings, you can kind of file. The triggers need to slide in and out of here, so we can put this on top and kind of test fit it to see if they're too tight or too loose or whatever. Probably not gonna be too loose though, but I set it anyway. So if I squeeze this together, does my trigger still move? No, see it's kind of tight in there. So I'm gonna file, clean it up best I can. Either file the triggers or file the grip. Smooth that out. Then we're gonna do lots of heat inserts. I believe it's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 7 heat inserts. 8 inserts. Got the one on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do some more of this guy. Put it in the hole, push down. I think these are the holes they already resized, so they don't actually gush out as much plastic. So I think, at least for our printers, that's very nice. They just fit perfectly. Again, these are just 3/16, I believe. Maybe a hair bigger. Well, it's anyway. Yeah, so you don't really get much gushing out there at all. Perfect. Just enough to lock it in, but not enough to gush everywhere. And the last one is on the bottom for the grip, the foregrip kind of thing. Yeah, those are hot, careful. We do have these little button things, which are designed to hold the switches into place. So those can just be kind of smashed into place or hammered, depending on how tight they are. The active is just screw ports, really, in case the holes come out too gunky. So honestly, I don't really think they're needed, but you can put them in anyway. They don't do much. There you go, those are in. And then I find it easiest to put the trigger in first and then the pins for the trigger, instead of the other way around, depending on how long your spring is and whatnot. So I'll put the spring in first and then the pins in. Again, you should fit pretty good. Looks good. And then of course your rev trigger is gonna go here. And then this one actually has a return spring, this little one. And so we can put our switches in. These are with 2x12, so these are the skinniest, longest guys. 4 of those left. Yep. And then they just get installed with some Phillips driver. Switch that out again. So I'm gonna put this one here. The exact orientation doesn't really matter on this one as long as you solder to the right connections, but this way you can kind of see the names of the connections sticking up. And then this one, it does matter a little more just because you have that spring that's designed to go in it, but again, doesn't really matter as long as you solder to the right terminals. Okay, and then your last little teeny tiny spring is for the rev trigger reset. I'll clean that out a little bit so I can fit the spring in there. And then that's gonna go in front on top of the button kind of thing on the switch. Push that spring down in there. You don't wanna just squish the spring like I just did. Make sure the spring sits in the hole of the trigger and onto the body of the switch such that you can press it and it just resets like that. You hear it click, 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 click. We're good there. And then we're gonna attach this to the rest of the body before I put on this main grip, just because I'm gonna finish my soldering so that way it's all in one build and not like multiple halves I gotta try to fuse together later. So, although if I remember right, you can put this on now. Oop. Don't let anything jump out at you. I'm gonna put this on now because the other half of the slide or the grip actually just goes on top of that. And that's another 3x10 with a 2.5 drive, or a 2mm drive. You can tell the heat insert was very well installed because it's a very easy to install screw. Okay, so now we can do our pull test to figure out which wire goes where. So again, if we take our loose wire should be this positive one and pull that, be like, oh, it's this one. See, it's moving. So if I pull on this one, I can tell that, okay, this one's going to my battery, which according to, I don't want to pull it too hard though, because I want to keep my length good so I can have that length be set. So that's the end of my slack there. So I'm just going to pull that. Okay, that's where it needs to go. And then this goes straight to your flywheel trigger here. So that one's gonna go straight to the C, or the tab closest to your button on the switch of your rev trigger. And that'll give the blaster power when you rev it. And then the other red wire, let's see, is connected to the motors then. And that's gonna have two more connections. So the end of this one is going to go to the middle of my main trigger flywheel switch. So the middle, or the NO of my main trigger. So I'm just gonna tin the wire and then put it in the middle there. And then the last connection of this one is gonna go to the middle of my flywheel trigger here. So that way, when I put power to the flywheels, I also have power ready to go on my switch. So I'm just gonna measure that out a little bit, strip out a little bit of wire, tin that, and then bend over the connection, bend the connection over, solid. And then all I have left is my other black wires, and so I've got one that should go straight from the NC, which is this black one here. So if I pull this one, I should feel resistance on one of these. Is it this one? Nope. Is it this one? Nope. It must be this one. Yep, it's this one, the first one. So when I pull this wire, I kind of feel it tugging on the back end, and that's gonna go straight to the C of my trigger. I can see this wire is too long, so I'm going to update that part of the build guide for the rest of y'all as well, so you can kind of follow the wire lengths and not be messed up by having a lot of wires to have to tuck in. So it'll be like a nice perfect build for you. But that's going to go to the trigger to the C, and it's going to have that much excess. So then I'm going to make note of that for the build guide update. So it's got about 3 inches of excess. Oh, which one was it? Was it this one? Yes. Okay. And then last but not least is the final black one, which should be the one going to the NC. So the end of this should be connected to everything else. So I shouldn't be able to pull this one at all. It should be nice and snug. But that's one's then going to go to my last connection on my trigger. And again, this one's too long. So I'm going to cut that and measure it. That was 2 inches too long. So I'm going to then solder this one in to here. Underneath the other wire is kind of a mess now, but the joint is what matters. There you go. So got one wire that's still too long actually. That's going to the Flywheel C, but that's my battery connection. So I want that one to be long, so I've got room for my battery, but it's definitely longer than it needs to be. So let's just like say maybe an inch shorter on that one, but I'll mark that down later. But now we can go back to where we left off in the guide and put the other half of the grip on. And I'm going to make sure that my wires stay in that channel there in the grip. They'll like to jump out at you. We don't want to end up with any pinched wires. So I'm just going to actually put it to the side like that. Make sure my trigger's still in there. Make sure my grip goes on and that the holes line up in the trigger and the trigger spring is still in there. Then with that squeezed down, make sure my trigger's reset. So I got my rev trigger, it pushes and resets. And then my main trigger is a little tight. I'm gonna put those screws in to see how it is. These are just M3x10s with more 2mm drives. And if it is too tight, I will go back and file some more. I'll probably make the official triggers a hair skinnier in the file set so that there's, even if you reprint your ceilings and your supports come out a little gross, you'll have plenty of room for those triggers to reset. That's just less filing and less post-processing for you guys. But I'm gonna put in this screw here, and then it's another 10 directly behind it. And then there's a 10 in the lower. The back two most are gonna be the longer flathead, so I believe they're 3x20s. So I'm gonna leave the last two open for the 3x20s. So now I see them both reset. That resets, we're good. If I squeeze the grip too hard, they won't reset. You can use lube, more filing, that kind of stuff. And then the last ones here are gonna be M3x20 flatheads. So I'm going to pull my battery wire so I don't pinch anything in there. Slide that in there, and then slide the upper in as well. So then that's gonna be another 2mm here. Make sure it goes through both sides, and then make sure this one goes through cleanly, the holes line up. Then I'm gonna work on the rest of the stock. We're getting close, getting excited, but what we need to do is add our sling point, which is optional, but it uses a M4 narrow hex nut in the bottom of this here that you can then glue in. But I'll put that hex nut in there, and if it's tight or hard to get in, then you can use an M4 screw to pull it towards you closer, such that you're using the screw to pull the hex nut into its downmost position. Use a drop of glue, set that in there, because that's hard to get to. And then it does use a brass heat insert in this one. This is the last heat insert, just to help hold the bottom together. There we go, just like that. Then I'm gonna again smush down the extra gunk in there, and then if you have solder on your tip, I would highly recommend cleaning your tip before doing that. Got some solder in there, so when that dries, I'll clean that out. But then not too bad though, so we're gonna take this rear stock piece, we're going to install this battery cover that just helps keep the battery separate from the other electronics, which you don't really need, but I do that now because it's easier to do it when the blaster isn't all together. And then we've got the battery wire is gonna come out the top there so it doesn't get pinched underneath. And then again, make sure all your wires are tucked onto either side so that the stock can slide on. So yeah, the battery connector needs to go on the inside. There we go. The battery connector comes out the top. Slide that all the way down so that you can see the holes line up, and that's going to be M3x10s, 2 on each side, 1 on the bottom. Okay, and I guess just following his build guide, you can test the stock. You might need to file the inside stock, use lube, break it in, whatever you need to do, get rid of your elephant's foot so the stock can actually slide. Gotta press the buttons. The buttons are too wide. There we go. Oh, smashing the battery connector. Noob. There we go. One-way stock now. But then your thumb screw would go here, so that way the stock doesn't all the way come off and you don't want it to. If your prints came out pretty good tolerance or pretty loose, definitely want that because you won't have as much friction to hold it in. Okay, and then the mag release. You can test it now as well. Make sure it actually releases and does its job. Looks good. Mag release on here, another M3x10 flathead. Connect the mag release to the lever. And then the last thing is this dust cover up top. And then again, make sure your pin fits. I want it to be loose in one side and tight in the other, so I'm gonna do a 1/8 to widen this guy. So it'll be loose in my grip and then tight in my dust cover. So loose in my grip and tight in my dust cover. In fact, I only need it to be tight in one side of my dust cover, but adjust as needed. Get that set in all the way. There we go. So test your dust cover, make sure it actually locks in like that. Oh, it's because the wheels are too big. I use these Pulsar wheels that were not actually part of the official build yet. So the Hurricane wheels are smaller. So I'm gonna have to do a lot more changes to get the Pulsars to work, which she actually already did. But there it is. That's the Sirius.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, that's a hit. Got one.